YouTube, what's going on? YCImaging here with another video, and today we're going to be reviewing the Lumix G85 by Panasonic. A quick specs rundown on this camera: it does 4K up to 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second up to 1080. It has in-body image stabilization, focus peaking and zebras for the people who are in the video, and a bunch of different autofocus features as well. Just looking around the camera body, you're going to see a few different things that you're used to seeing: HDMI port, external mic input, remote input, your standard SD card slot. This camera body is actually pretty similar to the Lumix G7. So the thing that really got me excited about checking out this camera personally is the in-body image stabilization at this price point. Right now the Lumix G85 is coming in at about $1,000 with the kit lens, and at around $850 for just the body. With the in-body image stabilization at this price point, this camera was kind of sort of looking like a GH4 killer to me, so I decided to pick it up and try it out. Coming from the Panasonic GH4, me personally, I always use the Metabone speed booster with the Sigma 18-35 lens, so I decided to pick up the Lumix 12-35 f2.8 to test this camera out the right way. With a little bit of time that I had to actually try this camera out, I tested it in so many different situations. The entire time that I was testing this camera out, I decided to leave autofocus on just to see how great it would basically vary in a lot of different situations, and it actually worked out really nice. Our first test with the Lumix G85 was me putting it on the DJI Ronin and shooting shots of me actually jogging up the street. I decided to do a super wide shot, and I also shot in very close just to see how it would really catch me while I was jogging and see if it would actually dance between me and the background. It actually held up fairly well. This video clip that you're looking at was shot on the DJI Ronin, as I said before. We zoomed it in all the way to the maximum 35mm on the 12-35 2.8 lens, and as you can see, the autofocus is amazing. It had me in focus the whole time. It never danced with the background. So all in all, the autofocus on this is amazing. The second test that we decided to do with this camera was to use it on a music video set where the lighting wasn't really that great. I have a simple sandwich light setup on my subject, as you can see, but there are lots of dark spots as well where I wasn't so sure if the camera was gonna catch the subject or the background. The wide shots the camera did very well, but as you can see on some of these close-up shots right here, the camera kind of sort of really wasn't catching the focus point that well, but it's a lot of great sections in this actual shot that I'll be able to use for the music video, so I would say it worked out fairly well in this situation. In terms of the in-body image stabilization, I think this works out amazing as well. Over the course of the last week, I decided to leave the in-body image stabilization on the camera at all times as well, to see how it would favor in different situations. The shots right here where Tina was filming me walking with the G85 and the image stabilization on the camera, you can see up in the left corner, it's doing kind of sort of some wacky things with the image, which I didn't really like that well, but that's kind of sort of to be expected when you're moving a lot with the camera. Whereas in this shot where you can see us driving up the highway, this shot is super smooth. The in-body stabilization basically smoothed the camera out perfectly. You can see little to no jerk in this shot, and it almost looked like we shot this on a Ronin. If you're planning on using the in-body image stabilization for this camera, I would say try not to move as much. It works well, but as I said, it will do some wacky things to your footage. It's almost like using warp stabilization in post, where your subject is moving a lot and the camera or the program can't really it doesn't really know what to do when you're moving that much. So as I said, when you're using this, if you're planning on using this, if you're planning on picking up the G85 and using the in-body image stabilization, all I can really suggest to you is to not really try to move that much. In terms of the things that I personally love about the camera, the in-body image stabilization, the autofocus, which I touched on, the image quality is pretty sharp as well. It's pretty much the things you're used to when you're using these Lumix cameras. Me owning the GH4 for over a year and then going to this and checking out the quality that's coming from this camera, it's very similar to the footage that I was getting from the GH4. Everything down to the color profile. It's basically, if you've ever owned a GH4, then you're gonna feel right at home using this camera. Very sharp quality at 4K and 1080 60 frames per second. I personally didn't have a great opportunity to go out and test this camera in low light situations, so what I decided to do was to basically just jack this up to around 64 ISO and see how it performed in terms of overall quality and noise retained. As you can see in these clips right here, this footage actually looks pretty good. It really surprised me the fact that there was not that much grain in these shots, and the fact that 6400 ISO footage is very well usable. I decided to film the same thing at 6400 ISO, 3200 ISO, and also at 1600 ISO. Here I'm gonna punch into these images at 200% so you can see the amount of noise retained in each ISO setting. I decided to drop a basic color grade on this footage to see how it would look after I go in and crush the blacks on it, and it actually looks pretty well. Coming from the GH4, I think that the low light quality on this camera is actually a lot better. A few things that I personally dislike about this camera is the ISO adjustments. The ISO adjustments jump in intervals of basically double. If you've ever used like a Canon Rebel series and you know exactly what I'm talking about, you get like the 200 jump, the 400 jump, to 800 jump, to 1600 jump, to 3200 and 6400. And I'm not really a fan of that coming from the GH4. Like I said, you have like the intervals in between. You can go to you have the intervals in between basically. Say you specifically want to use a 2.8 aperture for a shot. Having to jump from 400 to 800 ISO really makes it difficult for you to tune in and expose the image how you want to sometimes, which is kind of sort of a bummer. Another thing that I dislike about this camera is the picture profiles. This camera comes equipped with Cinelike D, which is not that bad of a profile, but I personally wish that this camera came equipped with a log profile. I'm not sure if you can personally get Vlog for this camera and pay for it, but I'm sure you probably could. Regardless, log does not come internal on this camera. Another bummer about this camera is it does not have variable frame rates. Coming from the GH4, I'm used to having those variable frame rates, 24 frames per second, 36 frames per second. 48, 60, 72, all the way up to 96, and this does not have that. Another great thing about the variable frame rate option on the GH4 is it conforms your footage in camera. So if you were to film at 60 frames per second in the variable frame rate option on the GH4, you can basically get a slow motion playback on the camera, and that's not available in the Lumix G85. By far, the biggest bummer about this camera that I personally noticed was the fact that my Metabone speed booster did not fit it. I think the Metabone speed booster mount physically did fit the camera, but the actual build of the camera did not allow it to go onto the G85 and screw in. As you can see in this shot right here, basically the arch that goes over the mount on the camera won't allow my speed booster to physically go on it and screw in. And I'm not sure if all speed boosters are the same. I actually have the first generation of the Metabone speed booster, which is discontinued now. So I'm not sure if it's just personally the one that I have or it's all of them, but I was not physically able to put my Metabone speed booster onto this camera and test out my Sigma 18-35 lens, which was a complete bummer because as much as I like the 12-35 lens, the native Lumix lens, it was amazing. I love my Sigma even more just because of the low aperture. And you know, when you equip that with the speed booster, you can go even down. You can go down even lower, and it gives you more of a field of view as well. So the fact that my speed booster did not fit this camera was a complete bummer for me, and it's just a complete no-go for me. So in terms of me purchasing this camera, that right there is just a no-go for me. The Lumix 12-35mm f2.8 lens was great. The autofocus on it was pretty solid, pretty smooth, silent. I didn't hear it like trying to autofocus in between my clips or anything like that. The image quality on it was very sharp, and I would definitely recommend this lens if you're into native lenses. So who specifically is the Lumix G85 for? My vlogging experience on this camera was amazing. The fact that it has a swivel screen, 4K up to 30 frames per second, the 1080-60s were very sharp. As I said, the image quality on this camera is amazing. Me personally, if I was looking to pick this camera up, I would specifically use it for vlogging. If in-body image stabilization and great autofocus is mandatory to you, I would definitely suggest you pick this camera up. More serious filmmakers who basically enjoy the ergonomics of Lumix cameras, you know, you just enjoy the actual colors, basically the video quality, the menu system, all that type of stuff. If you love Lumix, I would basically suggest that you go grab you a GH4. Though this camera has a lot of features that the GH4 does not have, the GH4 also has a lot of pro features that this does not have. The different ISO intervals, the different frame rates, the in-body conformative clips. All of those things right there mean a lot more to me personally than having great autofocus, because I don't really use autofocus that much. But as I said, if autofocus is a big deal for you, I would definitely recommend you pick this camera up. I know there are gonna be a lot of people in the comments asking me the Lumix G85 or the Sony a6300/a6500. And I'm gonna say the a6300/a6500. That's gonna conclude my personal review on the Lumix G85. If you guys have any other questions on topics that I personally did not touch on, make sure to leave questions down in the comments. Also, if you all have another camera that you would like me to review, drop that down in the comments as well. If you like this video, make sure to leave me a like, comment, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'm gonna check y'all out on my next video. Peace.